There exists a darker side to the unknown, where the truth is hidden, and the most disturbing enigmas linger. Such mysteries can leave us with a sense of unease and force us to confront the darkness. Number 10. The Gulf Breeze 6 may sound like the name of a nefarious gang or biker club, but it was actually the name given to yet another chilling UFO incident that took place in Gulf Breeze, Florida, back in the late 1980s. According to the documents, 6 Florida dwellers claimed to have seen a series of unidentified flying objects. One such craft had been a triangular shape. The mystery of whether these were genuine encounters, hoaxes, or even the misidentifications of other aircraft still lingers, adding to the intrigue of the incident. While some maintain that either one of these theories could be correct, none of the official investigations were able to produce clear-cut answers. Gulf Breeze is a hotspot for alien spacecraft sightings, earning itself a dot on the map for places with the most UFO encounters, and possibly being added to the list of places aliens should visit. Nearby this area are 5 military bases, meaning the skies are regularly filled with bright flashes and twinkling lights. While sightings are common here for this reason, these particular incidents were far more ominous than the "it's just a plane" conclusion. One individual right in the center of it all was a contractor named Ed Walters, who would later write a book about his experience. He explained that the incident had turned his life upside down. At some point during the 80s, Walters had been in his office looking out the window when a bright blue beam suddenly struck him. There was a humming noise that never seemed to cease, and a blast of air before hearing the voice of an entity, although he described it as the voice from the UFO. It was a soft voice, and Walters couldn't decipher anything being said, but he knew that the UFO was there. It was November of 1987 when he was able to snap some Polaroids of a large unidentified floating object right outside the window. It hovered 200 feet off the ground and looked as though it was something from a Spielberg film. The pictures were later published in the Sentinel, a local newspaper. Trying to authenticate these Polaroids appeared to be an impossible task. In December of that year, he reportedly had another experience with the blue beam. This time he had seen the UFO, and it projected a blue light that covered his body. He tried to reach for his camera, but his arms wouldn't let him. He was blue, and so were his arms. He described the sensation of compression, as though the beam was pressing down on him with just enough force to prevent him from moving. A few months later, another witness saw the object, Walter's wife, Frances. It appeared above the family's pool before disappearing back into the sky. The two stayed up for the rest of the night, trying to figure out how to move forward from this event. The impact of this sighting on the local community was profound, leading to a surge in reports of UFO sightings. One such sighting came from a local councilwoman who had seen an orange unidentified object dash across the sky before completely vanishing. A local doctor confirmed such accounts after seeing a silent, disc-shaped craft hovering above the pier while out on his morning jog. The next report would come from a family of 3 who'd seen the alien spacecraft in the neighborhood that Walters lived in. It was Denise Boone and her 2 daughters who spotted the entity in the South Side neighborhood. It was a spinning mechanical creation that hovered just above the trees. The girls were the first to see it and ran inside to get their mother. She described it as something that didn't take the shape of a plane or a helicopter. It was a sight that seemed to defy all earthly explanations, truly otherworldly in nature. Number 9. In 1994, a hospital had taken some random goo and placed it under a microscope. They found that it contained human white cells. This goo came from the sky following an event known as the Oakville Blobs. It was the 7th of August in Oakville, Washington, when rain began to fall at 3 in the morning, covering 20 square miles. Rain was common in the area, and residents soon began to notice something unusual. It was gelatinous, a sort of jelly blob that had never been seen before. Over 3 weeks, it rained jelly blobs 6 times. When it began, an officer, David Lacey, had been on patrol with a friend as the rain started. He turned his windshield wipers on, and instead of wiping away some droplets, it just smeared across the glass. Because of the now obscured visibility, Lacey was forced to pull over into a gas station where he tried to clean it off manually, wearing a pair of latex gloves just in case. It felt the way it looked. and it looked like clear jello. A resident, Dottie Hearn, waited for the rains to cease before stepping outside. Initially mistaking the jelly blobs for hail, upon touching the substance, she felt a wave of discomfort. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Later that day, Lacey, Dottie, and many other Oakville residents fell violently ill. They struggled to breathe, their vision blurred. They felt increasingly nauseous and experienced a heightened sense of vertigo. Beverly Roberts, another resident, described the town as being plagued by flu-like symptoms that persisted for 2 to 3 months. Even pets that came into contact with the goo fell ill. Dottie had been feeling weak and cold, and later moved to the hospital and was diagnosed with a severe inner ear infection. Her daughter managed to collect a sample of a blob, believing it may be connected to her mother's illness. And this is how the sample ended up in a lab and was found to contain the human cells. It was then sent to a microbiologist, Mike McDowell, who found that the goo was teeming with 2 different kinds of bacteria, one of which lives in the human digestive system. Due to this, he concluded that it was human waste that likely fell from an airplane. But the Federal Aviation Administration requires that the waste be dyed blue, but this substance was perfectly see-through. Regulations also prevented pilots from releasing waste mid-flight. Later testing carried out by another microbiologist, Tim Davis, determined that there was eukaryotic cells, a cell that's present in most living organisms, indicating that this glob was once living. One theory pointed to military testing that's run at sea. It was thought that the test had destroyed a nearby school of jellyfish, which sent them flying right into the atmosphere and later rained down again. But many questioned the validity of this theory. Some suggested that Oakville was a test subject for more sinister military experiments. Unfortunately, all of the uncollected blobs disappeared, and there are no remaining samples at the Washington Department of Health. In fact, they have no record of receiving any reports of a gelatinous rain. Without these crucial samples, the truth about the Oakville blobs remains frustratingly out of reach. Number 8. November 29, 1980. Dear Mother and Father, I've gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured me a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I'm leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I'll no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. This is the enigmatic letter left to Granger Taylor's parents upon his departure on the evening of the 29th of November in 1980. It was a night of heavy torrential rains and gale-force winds that ripped across Vancouver Island in British Columbia. During this violent storm, Taylor, a 32-year-old, soft-spoken mechanical genius, taped this very note to his parents' door. Initially, it wasn't an entire surprise because the mechanic had built a spaceship-like creation in the backyard and alleged that he was talking with aliens, but the family didn't think that he would actually lift off and disappear into the sky. Taylor was heading out on an alien adventure, entrusting his possessions and his loyal dog, Lady, to them. Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness in his pink pickup truck. It wasn't certain what fueled the man's belief that he could speak with aliens, but whatever it was, he seemed set on his voyage. He was convinced that he'd been chosen by the otherworldly beings to fulfill a greater purpose, which would exceed any earthly accomplishment that he could possibly make. His disappearance remains one of Canada's most enduring mysteries, with no possible end in sight. The questions centered around the possible use of psychedelics, an undiagnosed illness, or if the man really did hitch a ride with extraterrestrials that he'd been conversing with. The first possible piece of evidence hadn't come about the man's possible whereabouts until 6 years later. It was in 1986 when an explosion site was found, and remnants of a truck were discovered littered across the expanse. The authorities found that the VIN matched Taylor's Datsun pickup, but the scraps were blue, not pink. Robert Keller, the missing man's best friend, denied that these remnants belonged to that same truck, asserting again that Taylor's vehicle was not pink. In 2019, a documentary called Spaceman was released, exploring what may have happened to the man and what his life was like just a few days before his disappearance. Perhaps he's embarking on his voyage back home, the only possibility left now since no new clues have ever been unearthed. And until legitimate evidence comes about the fate of Granger Taylor, he remains alive in the eyes of his friends and family. Number 7. Tucked below the foothills of the Second Watchung Mountain, just off Somerville Road, lies the captivating Fairlock Castle. This French Norman-style building, nestled in the Bernards Township of New Jersey, is a sight to behold. Its history, a blend of heartbreak and the paranormal, adds an intriguing layer to its beauty. In 1923, Bill Beatty, his wife Sarah, and his brother Frank began designing Fairlock. It was said to have 29 rooms, a slate roof, stained glass windows, homemade floor tiles, a great hall, a tower, and a wonderful winding staircase. It was designed by Bill himself, based on his ancestors' home in England. By 1930, the building began on the 150-acre property in Basking Ridge, and the brothers had just the right amount of money for it as well. The castle built was Bill's dream house. Unfortunately, though, he would never get to see it completed, because in 1931, the 45-year-old succumbed to a bitter case of the flu. For 5 more years, the mansion remained unfinished, and Sarah Beatty never remarried. But she would raise her 4 children in the castle that her husband built, where they remained until 1941. Following this, the estate would then be used as an all-boys school, serving this purpose for decades. Fairlock was sold in 1972 to Don and Carol Burlingame, and remodeling began. It was then that the paranormal activity would begin as well. Carol had been the first to figure out that something unnatural was lurking in the house. She also had a friend who was an amateur parapsychologist, who would be brought in to investigate. Dr. Michaeline Mayer had told of a presence in the house. It was a friendly one and male. Carol thought a seance might be the way to get rid of the wandering spirit, but Mayer insisted that they best leave him alone. So the married couple continued on with their lives and soon moved into the estate. The two knew there was a presence but didn't realize how unrested it really was. After settling in, they began to hear hammering noises that bounced off the walls down the hallway. Footsteps echoed up and down the staircase, and eventually, Don and Carol accepted that they were sharing their new home with the ghost of Bill Beatty. The being almost demonstrated just how much he really cared about his home, and showed it in an unusual way. One day, the couple opted to go for a drive, and Don suggested that the windows be closed for the coming rain. But Carol didn't think there would be any rain and left the windows open. The two went out, and lo and behold, it began to rain. Upon their return, they found every single window, each of which opened from the inside, had been closed and latched. There was not a single drop of rain in the house. The two wanted to learn more about the history surrounding the castle, and found that Bill's ghost had been in the mansion long before they moved in. In 1934, 3 years after his passing, Sarah was searching for her next bracelet with the help of Eugene Melville, a man who worked for Bill and his wife. While searching for a bracelet, a figure appeared on the balcony, and the widow cried out, stating that it was her husband. The figure didn't stay long enough to be examined, but the woman knew exactly who it was. Number 6. It was the 13th of August, 1956, a day marked by the escalating Suez Crisis and the looming Soviet threat. On this day, the RAF launched a fleet of aircraft to intercept a mysterious object that had breached the United Kingdom's radar shield. This unidentified vehicle was seen circling a nuclear-armed base in Suffolk. The events that followed were shrouded in secrecy for decades, with the British government never offering a satisfactory explanation. The incident was listed as unexplained during a secret briefing to ministers the following year, adding to the mystery. The case would later be awarded an iconic status in ufology, and became the second most famous incident behind the Rendlesham Forest event in 1980. But our incident was the only one listed as an unexplained event by the Colorado University Study of UFOs that was commissioned in 1969 by the U.S. Air Force. The story took place in the vicinity of Lakenheath and Bentwaters in Suffolk, where an airbase was situated, and the occurrence would later become known as the Lakenheath Bentwaters incident. It would also be the event that was enough to convince several scientists, like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, that UAPs needed some serious study. A reconstructed retelling of the UFO incident went something like this. The evening of the 13th, the skies were clear, and the atmosphere was calm in eastern England. As the day drew to a close, nothing indicated that the world was about to experience the most amazing UFO military encounters. At 9:30 that evening, the USAF radar at RAF Bentwaters picked up on an unidentified object that was 25 to 30 miles east of the base. It moved at 4,000 miles per hour and inexplicably disappeared, heading in a northwestern direction. Clearly, this was no regular airplane, jet, or aircraft. A second airman had also been watching his radar elsewhere when he saw two formations of slow-traveling blips. Very quickly, the RAF got a Venom fighter in the air at Water Beach near Cambridge, but right after it took off, one of the wing fuel tanks crashed just outside the city, and the craft was forced to turn back. The airbase then sent out two USA FT-33 jets as a training exercise. They were instructed to search for the UFOs, which could be seen on radar at Bentwaters. The two pilots came back empty-handed, with one of them, Chuck Metz, believing that odd weather conditions were causing the blips. The incident slowly subsided, but then another object, traveling at hypersonic speed, dashed across radar scopes, and just seconds later, one airman who'd been in the control tower saw an incredibly bright light whiz over his head, but it made no sound. Later, a pilot who was in a C-47 transport aircraft reportedly saw some blurry lights beneath his plane. He explained that it was traveling incredibly fast and was dashing from east to west. Bentwaters called Lakenheath and instructed that the USAF base should keep an eye out for odd activity. The air traffic supervisor, Forrest Perkins, headed over to the controllers and checked their screens. It didn't take long for blips to pop up. These objects would stop and start in a strange way, inconsistent with any aircraft known to man. The blips were heading north, traveling at 400 to 600 miles per hour, and more echoes were spotted by a second radar, which was using a different frequency. Perkins managed to get word all the way to the RAF Fighter Command responsible for air defense in the area. It was midnight when the senior officer, Flight Lieutenant Freddie Wimbledon, looked at his screens and saw something up in the air, 10 to 20,000 feet over the United Kingdom. It was behaving abnormally, and he reported that it was traveling at an impossible speed. He then set up an interception team of 4, and they were instructed to take action. Soon, one of the pilots spoke the words, "Contact Judy." This meant that the navigator had the object on his radar screen and didn't need any more help from ground control. No less than a few seconds later, this pilot changed his decision, stating that he'd lost contact and needed more help. There was a sweep across the screens on ground control, and then the object reappeared. The target was behind him. Number 5. Situated in Lake Wales, Florida, is a house that should be avoided. It looks like any other ordinary house, but as we know, appearances can be deceiving. And if you want to know which house to avoid, it's the one at 1424 Lakeview Road. It began in 1991, when 19-year-old Alan Mann was living in a home with his parents. He was working night shifts and would usually catch up on sleep during the day. One day, at around 3 p.m., Mann had settled down to catch some sleep when suddenly the image of a woman appeared before him. He explained that it had turned away from the door as though it was leaving, and by the time he was able to get up, the figure had turned the corner and disappeared. He searched the house looking for the woman, but nothing was there. He told his mother about what he had seen, but she didn't believe him. That seemed to be the end of it until the man's bride, Linda, moved in. Linda had been watching some TV with her mother-in-law, Sandra. When Sandra looked down at the end of the couch, she noticed a white smoky apparition, and so did her dog, Prince. The dog was now on his feet, but by that time it vanished. Linda hadn't seen the apparition that day, but was already fully convinced that the place was haunted, so she got a friend to come over with the Ouija board. The board spelled out the name Kramer, but Mann's father still needed convincing. He didn't believe that they had anything to worry about and didn't want to admit that there was some ghostly presence floating around the house. One of Mann's close friends enjoyed heading over for coffee, but this stopped following one of the paranormal events. The two were at the kitchen table having their coffee when the friend stopped and announced that he needed to leave. The friend alluded to a being that had just walked into the living room and quickly expressed that he never wanted to return. While Mann and his wife were aware of this eerie atmosphere in the house, they were not prepared for what would happen next. In a sudden and unprovoked attack, Linda turned on her husband. According to Mann, She seemed to lose control, attacking him while emitting an evil laugh. But Linda had no memory of the terrifying incident. The once harmless ghost had now taken a malevolent personality, one that even David, the father, could not ignore. The family sought help from spiritualists and believers who advised them to place salt around the house and under their beds. The household even attempted a home exorcism, but to no avail. It didn't take long for the house to begin to smell, and the family suffered from headaches. Some of the rooms in the building became very cold, and then the voices started. It sounded like a mass of voices muttering on top of one another, and nothing was distinguishable. The Manns had had enough, and the couple decided to move out, but later they would divorce following the torment they experienced. And soon the story would reach the Center for Paranormal Studies. 3 of the Institute's founders loaded up their equipment and headed to the house, one of which was the parapsychologist Andrew Nichols. According to him, Linda and Mann's old bedroom seemed to emit the most amount of energy. 2 Polaroid pictures even proved this. In one of the pictures, a human figure stood in the forefront. More experts, such as paleontologists, radiologists, and more would also set up in the house, and they could determine that something extremely odd was going on there. Something beyond natural explanation. The house was haunted. 2 months later, one of the local ministers went by the house, and the activity seemingly stopped, but this was likely due to no longer having victims to latch onto. Number 4. One thing is certain about the evening of the 11th of October, 1973. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker Jr. would arrive in an absolute panic at the Pascagoula, Mississippi Sheriff's Department. They pointed out puncture wounds on their arms and claimed to have been abducted by aliens. The authorities attempted to catch them out in a lie, but that effort didn't work. It was also revealed that they both passed a polygraph test. And the story behind the frantic behavior of the 2 individuals was nothing less than disturbing, and it went something like this. Hickson was Parker's shipyard foreman, and the 2 decided to head out on a fishing trip after work. They made their way to an abandoned boat launch on the Pascagoula River, staying there until the sun began to disappear. It was dusk when the 2 heard a strange whirring sound, followed by flashes of blue light reflecting off of the water. They looked to the skies, and above them, there hovered an oval-shaped object, estimated to be between 30 to 40 feet in length and 8 to 10 feet high. It was the classic description of an alien UFO. But the 2 were not prepared for what would happen next. 3 entities emerged as the craft hovered there, floating just like their vehicle. Hickson and Parker became paralyzed as the creatures grabbed them with pincer-like appendages and pulled them towards the floating dome. They were still conscious by the time they entered, and were about to undergo some strange sort of medical exam, performed by what they described as a sizable robotic eye. The eye would make a buzzing mechanical sound for the duration of this exam, until the men were dropped back at the Delta. Hickson reportedly found that his friend was standing up with his arms raised, screaming. They watched as the enigmatic object sped off, and the 2 ran off for help. They soon found themselves at the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, where the officers believed they were intoxicated or maybe lying. The effort that the investigators attempted, the one that was supposed to catch them out in a lie, involved secretly leaving a recording device in the interview room, hoping to catch the men dropping the act and exposing their lie. But they never did, and they sounded genuinely terrified and expressed concerns for their families. Later, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University, investigated the case. His conclusion was that this was a very real and frightening experience. An artistic rendering of Hickson and Parker's descriptions of the beasts soon followed. They were 6 feet tall with robotic undertones. They were said to be gray and had elephant-like skin, slit-shaped mouths, and crab-like pincers. At the time of the incident, Hickson was 42 years old and well-known in the community. He appeared to feel more capable of handling media pressure, and recounted the event to anybody who listened. In 1983, he published a book based on his experience. Parker, though, was just 19 at the time and new to the area, where he was trying to make some extra money. He told the media that he basically blacked out and couldn't remember anything. This was his only lie. It was reported that Parker bathed in bleach following his visit to the sheriff's department. He skipped town, got married, and found work. He would quit whenever someone recognized him at one of these jobs. In recent years, the man entered his 60s and even published a book of his own, but explained that the entire thing had turned his life upside down. Following the ordeal, the riverbank where the incident took place got a historical marker in 2019, and it was named one of the best documented alien abduction cases. Number 3. In 1886, a mining engineer, John Reed, stumbled upon a Native American group who told him of a nearby cave. It was Lovelock Cave, a legendary attraction that can be found in Nevada. He couldn't begin digging around the site for unspecified reasons, but soon others had gotten word of it, and the cave was attracting even more attention. In 1911, a group of miners were digging for some fertilizer when they discovered some unusual artifacts, and in 1912 and 1924, more excavations were carried out. These digs would uncover the remains of what would later become known as the Lovelock Giants. The beings, measuring some 8 to 10 feet in length, left historians scratching their heads in bewilderment. Strangely, something else was uncovered as well. It was a 15-inch long sandal that showed signs of having been worn. A boulder with a giant handprint was also among the findings. Later, a local newspaper reported another discovery of giant beings in Lake Titicaca near Lovelock, further deepening the mystery and baffling the world of archaeology and science even more. What could these beings be? Who were they, and where did they come from? These discoveries prompted some positivity in the questions regarding the authenticity of an ancient urban legend. It's this ancient story that may give us the answers we're looking for. Urban legends often stem from the oddest of places, usually from occurrences that ancient societies couldn't explain. Folklore is often left shrouded in mystery, and very few are able to deduce the truth about it. Nevada was once home to many indigenous tribes who inhabited the area long before Europeans. One of the Native American tribes had an incredible legend that connected directly to Lovelock and the beings found within it. They spoke of a civilization of giants adorned with red hair. According to the passed-down stories, these beings lived near Lovelock Cave. They were described as being 8 feet tall and cannibalistic in nature, often preying on people residing nearby. Could the beings found in the cave and the surrounding areas belong to the giants that these Native Americans spoke of? Support for this legend was another documented event that came from a 16th century Spanish conquistador. It was a tale depicting a civilization of giants coming across the ocean on their long-reed rafts. More remains have been found high up in the Andes Mountains, with some of them having preserved red hair still attached. But some ancients attribute this reddish tone to an interaction of the material with the environment. The connection between these archaeological findings and the Native American legend is a fascinating puzzle that continues to intrigue researchers. According to the legend, there was warfare between them and the neighboring giants as they sought to chase the predators away. The tribe succeeded, sending the red-haired beings to seek refuge in a nearby cave, Lovelock. The tribes demanded that the giants emerge and face them, but they refused. They then began to fire arrows at them and started a fire at the mouth of the cave. The giant beings were defeated, perishing in the cave while others tried to flee, only to succumb to their prey. Despite these legends, the archaeological finds, and the DNA surrounding these discoveries, the existence of these tall creatures remains unconfirmed. But for some, the answer is quite obvious, and can be found in an ancient story. One of the few that may be based on factual explanation for what a primitive society perceived. The need for further exploration and analysis is urgent, as it may hold the key to confirming the existence of these mysterious beings. Number 2. Back in 2016, one family would flee their home in a panic and head 800 kilometers north, and we still have no idea as to why. The Trump family consisted of 51-year-old Mark, his wife, 53-year-old Jacoba, and their 3 children, 29-year-old Rihanna, 25-year-old Mitchell, and 22-year-old Ella. The family was running a red currant farm from their property in Sylvan, Melbourne, and each of them worked hard to keep it going. Suddenly, though, on the 26th of August in 2016, the family left the property with no warning, climbed into their car, and fled north. They left their house unlocked and their horses unattended to. They also failed to take their credit cards and passports along with them on this impromptu road trip. It seemed as though they were running away from something, or maybe even someone. It didn't take long for friends and family to grow concerned when they were unable to reach them. The police were contacted and arrived at the home to find it in a state of disarray. It looked as though someone had been searching for something inside of the financial records, which were found sprawled across the home. The family also failed to take their cell phones along with them after Mark and Jacoba had banned technology on this peculiar trip. But Mitchell, though, acted against this and brought his device anyway. When they were 30 kilometers away from their home, the rest of the family forced him to throw it out the window. They were convinced that it was being used to track them. They journeyed through the first day and then the first night, and later reached Bathurst, 800 kilometers away from home. Around 7 the following morning, Mitchell was the first to become disillusioned and separated from his family. Later that morning, the remaining members then began heading east, heading for a popular tourist destination, the Jenolan Caves. When they arrived there, though, the two daughters also opted to part with their parents, so they took a car and headed to Goulburn, where they later reported their parents missing. The two sisters would then decide to split up at a gas station. Ella mentioned wanting to feed the horses, and they parted ways. She then made her way home and was the first of the 5 to do so. Authorities promptly greeted her upon her arrival. The following day, Mitchell was next, but something seemed odd. The brother and sister appeared to be unaffected by their family's sudden onset of psychosis. They seemed normal, but just a bit perplexed by this mysterious ordeal. But the other sibling, Rihanna, was much more affected and was discovered in the back of a truck bed. She was catatonic and seemingly suffering from amnesia, not knowing who or where she was. The truck driver was startled to find this individual in his truck and quickly contacted the local police. Rihanna was taken to the Goulburn Hospital. 3 of the 5 members were accounted for, leaving just Mark and his wife. Public interest grew, and a search was conducted to locate the car. It was determined that the couple had driven back to the Melbourne area from the caves. The pair split up. Jacoba went north, and the next day she was found wandering around Yass, but was agitated and subsequently taken to the hospital. She was later reunited with her daughter at the Goulburn Hospital. Mark was still in Wangaratta and was spotted after tailgating a couple reportedly playing Pokemon Go. Eventually, the couple stopped their car, and so did Mark. He exited the vehicle and ran toward them before stopping in the middle of the road. He stared at them briefly before disappearing into a nearby park. According to one source, the family had been under the impression that they were coming to be robbed or even the victims of a homicide, of which the authorities would find no evidence. Back at the ranch, Ella and Mitchell made a news appearance, baffled by their parents' behavior and pleading for their father to return. After 6 days, Mark was finally found on the road near the Wangaratta airport and released into the care of his brother, a police officer. Investigators found no threats against the family, and the reason for their sudden trip remains a mystery. There was no evidence of narcotics, and they didn't belong to any cult or religious sector. Ella and Mitchell explained that they'd never seen anything like this and couldn't explain it either. They just feared for their life and opted to flee. It was later explained that a likely explanation was that the family became overwhelmed with paranoia, which was fueled by each other, an event referred to as folie à deux, a shared delusion. Rihanna later spoke out about the situation, explaining that she wasn't sure why, but her father felt as though their lives were in immediate danger, which fueled everyone else's fear. Number 1. On the 5th of October 2017, 61-year-old Teteki Kutsi, a father of 6, was admitted to the hospital in South Africa. He'd just been transferred to a ward following an abdominal surgery. It was here that he was set to make a full recovery. One of the attending nurses had just checked in on the patient and stepped out to get some fresh linen, but when she returned, the recovering patient had disappeared. This was particularly odd, since he would have been unable to walk for a certain amount of time following the operation, but he was nowhere to be seen. 2 days later, the patient's family received a worried call from the hospital, wondering if he had made his way home, but he hadn't. During an investigation, the attending nurse explained that she'd last seen him at 5:15 that morning. The family headed back to the hospital, accompanied by police in an attempt to locate their missing relative. It wasn't until 15 days after his admittance that Teteki was found. On the 20th of October, a group of workers had been doing some renovations when they stumbled across something that they least expected to find in the ceiling of the facility. It was Teteki's lifeless body that had found its way into an isolated area of the ceiling. No one could figure out how he'd gotten there or what may have ended his life. According to one article, the hospital would then perform an autopsy and inform the family that the unexpected passing had not been from a complication in the surgical procedure. The staff also allegedly implied that it was not from natural causes. The deceased's family was also given the impression that he was no longer living before being hidden away. The local police department quickly latched on to this mysterious incident, and other researchers declared it was a teleportation case. They attribute this conclusion to the fact that an immobile patient disappeared way too quickly to have gone unnoticed. According to the official statement, the nurse had stepped out rather briefly, but this story didn't end with one victim, but two. A few years later, on the 10th of May in 2019, a construction worker had been doing a house repair when a wall collapsed, breaking his femur. He was rushed to the hospital in South Africa. After an assessment, the man was due to be transferred to another hospital to be treated. But before this could happen, a nurse checked in on him to find the patient no longer there. This case was similar to Tateki's for a few reasons. One of them was this patient was also immobile, meaning that disappearing so quickly all by himself was unlikely. The staff searched for the missing man everywhere, but failing this, they contacted the South African Police Department and reported the man missing. For another 2 weeks, the injured patient would remain missing. It was only when an unbearable smell permeated the hospital that one staff member discovered suspicious fluids dripping from the ceiling, and the man's body was found. On the 25th of May, the storeroom ceiling was checked, and there they found the missing man, in the same position that Tateki was discovered. At the time, the newly appointed official for health explained that they would investigate the case and how the man ended up in the ceiling. She also clarified that the patient was there for a broken femur and not psychiatric concerns, as others had suggested. According to the autopsy report released by the police department, the passing was due to natural causes. Both cases had little to no follow-up information, which only added to the mystery as to how these unrelated men ended up in the ceilings of unrelated hospitals. There exists a few theories about these incidents. Some believe that another patient in both cases may have been involved, but there was no evidence to suggest that this is what happened. Others point to adverse medication effects, such as the use of opioids for pain management. This type of medication could cause psychosis, but both patients were being monitored closely and showed no signs of such adverse effects. Disturbingly, in one of the Reddit forums covering this case, one individual reported that both men didn't pass away from natural causes, and that they'd been placed in the ceiling by something, which was certainly an interesting choice of words. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.